Clan Stewart of Appin is the West Highland branch of the Clan Stewart and have been a distinct clan since their establishment in the 15th century. The chiefs are descended from Sir James Stewart of Perston, who was himself the grandson of Alexander Stewart, the fourth High Steward of Scotland. His cousin Walter Stewart, the sixth High Steward, married Marjorie Bruce, the daughter of King Robert the Bruce, and the son Robert II was the first Stuart monarch. The Stewarts of Appin are cousins to the Royal Stewart Monarchy. History. Origins of the clan. The Appen Stewarts is the West Highland branch of Clan Stewart, descend from Sir James Stewart of Perston, fourth son of Sir John Stewart of Bonkell, second son of Alexander, the fourth High Steward of Scotland. Sir James was the grandfather of John Stewart of Innemeth, who, through marriage to Isabel MacDougall, daughter of John Gauldey MacDougall, Lord of Lorne, became the first Stuart Lord of Lorne. The Lordship of Lorne passed down for two more generations to Sir John Stewart, the third Stuart Lord of Lorne. Appen is located on the Scottish west coast between Benderloch to the south and the Ballachulish Narrows to the north in modern-day Argyll. Today the primary towns include Port Appen and Portnacroish. Both are scenic and are surrounded by forests and water. To the west are islands, including the island of Lismore, home to the Macleay and the Baron Butchall, keeper of the Butchall Mhor, adherents of Appin. There are numerous sites of interest, including Ard's Hell's Cave, Castle Stalker, the Clach Ruarach, Canapicholes, Ellen Munda, and Keele Churchyard. 15th century. Tradition tells that in 1445, while returning to his seat at Dunstaffnage Castle from the great cattle tryst at Chrys, Sir John met and fell in love with the daughter of MacLaren of Ardvich. Although married, he began an affair with his new love, which 1 year later produced a son. The first son of this union was called Dugald, and went on to become the progenitor of the famous Clan Stewart of Appin. Sir John Stewart was born around 1410, putting him at about 35 when he met the woman that would become his second wife. After the death of his first wife, Sir John waited, for reasons we are unaware of today, for 5 years until setting up the marriage between himself and Dugald's mother, but it may have had something to do with the politics of the day. In 1463, Sir John set a wedding date and sent for Dugald and his mother to come to Dunstaffnage. Unknown to Sir John, there was a plot to kill the Lord of Lorne. It is not fully known, but it is thought to have been set up by the Lord of the Isles, who was in a power struggle with the King of Scots, and who saw it as being in his best interest to neutralize this powerful and loyal representative of the king in the West Highlands. The other plotters, which some feel included Colin Campbell, Lord Argyll, Sir John's son-in-law, were primarily represented by Alan MacColl, the illegitimate grandson of an earlier MacDougall chief. As the lightly armed wedding party made its way from Dunstaffnage to the small chapel located approximately 180 yards from the castle walls, they were attacked by a superior force led by Alan MacColl. Although better armed, MacColl's force was defeated, but not before mortally wounding Lord of Lorne. Sir John was rushed into the chapel and MacColl and his henchmen ran into and occupied the deserted Dunstaffnage. With his last breath, Sir John married Dugald's mother, legitimizing him and making him the de jure Lord of Lorne. After receiving the last rites, Sir John expired and a new chapter in West Highland history was opened. Dugald gathered all the adherents of the Lord of Lorne and with the assistance of the MacLarens laid siege to Dunstaffnage, but to no avail. Unbeknownst to Dugald, Colin Campbell, Lord Argyll, who seemed to have been involved in the plot, raised a group of MacFarlanes to aid MacColl in his struggle against the de jure Lord of Lorne. MacColl's men with the MacFarlanes met the men of Lorne and MacLaren in what was to be known as the Battle of Leagadodda. It was a fierce battle with both sides leaving the field with very heavy losses. For the next few years Dugald, who had lost the title of Lord of Lorne through the treachery of his uncle Walter Stewart and the Lord of Argyll, but had retained Appen and Lismore, consolidated his power and fortified the hunting lodge of Castle Stalker on the Cormorant's Rock in Loch Lea. He also ensured that the Campbells were in no doubt about his displeasure over the loss of the Lordship of Lorne, by having the Campbell territory surrounding Appen regularly raided by the clan. Finally, in 1468, in a bid to finally destroy the power of Appen, Colin Campbell and Walter Stewart, the latter now recognised as the Lord of Lorne, organised a massive raid against Dugald and his clan. Alan Mokel was again involved and they met at what was to be known as the Battle of Stalk. Though losing many men, Dugald virtually destroyed the military strength of the MacFarlanes and personally killed Alan Mokel, his father's murderer. The battle solidified Dugald's claim to Appen and the surrounding area, which was formally granted to him by King James III on the 14th of April 1470. In 1497, some of the Clan MacLaren stole cattle from the Braes of Lochaber from the Clan MacDonald of Keppoch. The MacDonalds followed them and overtook them at a place called Glenurchy, where a battle took place. The MacDonalds won and recovered the cattle. However, the MacLarens then looked for assistance from Dugald Stewart of Appin. Another battle then took place where the MacLarens were now joined by the Stewarts against the MacDonalds. During the battle, Dugald, the chief of the Clan Stewart of Appin, and the Clan MacDonald of Keppoch chief were both killed. 17th century and Civil War. The Clan Stewart of Appin supported the royalist James Graham, 1st Marquess of Montrose, at the Battle of Inverlochy, the Battle of Aldern and the Battle of Kilsyth. After James VII was deposed in 1688, the Stewarts of Appin supported the deposed House of Stewart. 18th century and Jacobite risings. Appin naturally supported the Jacobite risings and sent men to fight in both the Jacobite Rising of 1715 and Jacobite Rising of 1745. At the Battle of Culloden in 1746, the Appen Regiment suffered 92 killed and 65 wounded out of a fighting force of approximately 300. Charles Stewart of Ardshiel led the men of the regiment, most notably Clan MacLaren, during the Rising of 1745. Ardshiel later escaped Scotland to meet his family in Europe, where he spent the rest of his days. Ardshell's Cave. On the 23rd of July 1745, Prince Charles Edward Stewart landed on the white sands of the Outer Hebridean island of Eriskay, accompanied only by a small band of companions known as the Seven Men of Moidart. This was the start of his claim to the Scottish and English throne and the Second Jacobite Uprising. On the 16th of April 1746, the Jacobite cause was finally put to rest at the Battle of Culloden. Charles Stewart of Ardshiel, one of the prince's commanding officers, hid from the English redcoats in a cave as they searched up and down the country for those involved. This place was henceforth known as Ardshell's Cave, sitting on a steep hillside at grid reference NN 008562 above Cantallan Bay in Loch Linney on the west coast of Scotland, between Oban and Fort William. The cave is no more than 40 minutes scramble from the loch side. The Stewarts of Ardshiel were the most important cadet family of the Stewarts of Appin. Totally loyal to the Jacobite cause, Stewart of Ardshiel led the regiment raised by the Stewarts of Appin at Culloden. They suffered appalling casualties when breaking the ranks of Barrel's and Munro's regiments of foot of the Hanoverian army. However, the outcome of Culloden was almost certain before it began. The Jacobite army, tired, hungry, improperly equipped and grossly outnumbered, were decisively defeated. After the victory, the English, led by the Duke of Cumberland, were ordered to execute all the Jacobite wounded and imprisoned. For this he was hereafter known as the Butcher. Having escaped death both in battle and the immediate aftermath, Stewart of Ardshiel made for his family seat, Ardshiel House, Cantallan Bay. His hope was that if he could evade capture for long enough, some sort of amnesty deal would eventually be struck. Nevertheless, none of the Jacobites in this predicament could imagine the determination and ruthlessness of Cumberland. Over the coming months 3,500 Jacobites were rounded up and imprisoned. Of these, 120 were immediately executed and a further 90 died in prison. 1,000 were transported to the colonies and 250 banished. 700 disappeared, the fate unknown. In addition, the clan system was destroyed with the Act of Proscription. They were disarmed and the kilt and tartan banned. It was in this climate that Ardshiel returned home and, knowing full well his fate, should he be caught, immediately went into hiding. He wanted to be near his wife and newborn son Stla. With her help he hid in the cave above his house. His wife would bring food and occasionally he would venture out under cover of darkness. Eventually the redcoats came and Ardshiel's house was cordoned off and his wife and child held prisoner. She must have been a brave woman because she gave nothing away, claiming that she hadn't seen or heard of her husband since he left with the Jacobite army. The redcoats thoroughly searched the surrounding area whilst Ardshiel himself was hiding under their noses. One account states that on 2 occasions they walked within yards of his hideout. The secret of Ardshiel's success was with the cave itself, and more importantly its situation. It lies behind a tall waterfall which completely hides the entrance, especially when the burn is in flood. Unless you know of its whereabouts, you could be standing 5 yards away and never find it. It stretches back some 15 or 20 feet and is easy to stand up in. However, it tapers down to no more than 2 or 3 feet at the back. The walls and floor are a bit damp, but there is a drier place towards the rear. Nevertheless, it is perfectly comfortable and completely sheltered from the elements outside. It can only be approached from one way, directly up the steep-sided burn, and is far enough away from Ardshiel House to make it a fairly arduous and demanding climb. If, however, your position is known, then escape is virtually impossible. The constant noise of falling water drowns out any approaching sounds, and your only way out is the same as the way in. Your pursuers would be on you in seconds before you could take a step. You'd be caught like a rat in a trap. On the whole, though, it makes a perfect hiding place, and one can imagine avoiding detection indefinitely and in complete safety. That said, Charles Stewart of Ardshiel was known to have been a large man of great personal strength and a proficient swordsman, one of the best in the Highlands. One can't help but think that he was like a caged lion and impatient to leave. The threat of capture for Charles Stewart of Ardshiel continued long after the redcoats had left Ardshiel House. If it wasn't an English soldier who turned him in, it was more likely to be a fellow Scotsman, particularly from the south. The Jacobite cause was to put a Catholic king back on the throne. This was considered by many as taking a step backwards. For the lowland Presbyterians, the defeat of the Jacobites was a cause for celebration. The Union and the Presbyterian system of church government were safe. Realizing that no amnesty was ever likely to be forthcoming, Ardshiel eventually fled to France and his lands were forfeited to the crown. His son Duncan Stewart of Ardshiel succeeded in having the lands restored later in the 18th century, and the Stewarts of Ardshiel then succeeded to the chiefdom of Appin upon the extinction of the Appen family. Appen Murder. Appin was the site of the infamous Appen Murder of 1752, when Colin Roy Campbell of Glenery, the Red Fox, who had been placed as government factor of the forfeited Stewart lands in Appin, was shot by an unknown sniper while riding along the shore of Loch Leven at Ballachulish. Although termed a murder, the killing of the Campbell in Appin during during the 18th century and before would have hardly qualified as such. It is important to note that the label Appen Murder was a designation given the event by a Campbell Hanoverian court. Whoever the shooter may have been, after the chief suspect, Alan Breck Stewart, made his escape, the half-brother of the chief, a cadet named James of the Glens, was charged with the murder, tried by a Campbell jury in the Campbell stronghold of Inverary presided over by Argyll himself, and, perhaps not surprisingly, was convicted and hanged on the shore of Loch Leven at Cnapach in Ballachulish. The consensus at the time and a general opinion of historians has been that James Stewart had nothing to do with the shooting. The incident was made famous by Robert Louis Stevenson, the plot of whose novel Kidnapped incorporated the death of Glenary. As an interesting postscript, many have tried to identify the shooter but without success. The identity is known within the chief's family, and when asked, the current chief stated that he had read and heard every theory and that none were close to being correct. The mystery continues. The Dawanwile. The Dawanwile, as they were known into the 18th century, are synonymous with the term tacksman and the modern designation of cadet. These were other gentry of the clan, normally related in one form or another by birth to the chief. These men controlled areas, or tax, within the greater clan lands. Rents were collected in various forms, and rents from the Dawanwile were in turn paid to the chief within some clans, and not in others. The primary cadets of Appen are Ardshiel, Agnicone, Fashnacloich, Invernahyle, and Strathgarry. The major branches of Appen stem from the sons of Alan Stewart, 3rd of Appen. Originally they comprised John, 1st of Strathgarry, Dugald, 1st of Agnicone, James, 1st of Fashnacloich, and Alexander, 1st of Invernahyle. Ardshiel, the branch our chief hails from, was given to John, 1st of Ardshiel by his father, John Stewart, 5th of Appen, Andrew Francis Stewart of Lorne, Appen and Ardshiel, 17th of Appen and Amp, 12th of Ardshiel. The current chief of Appen is descended from Charles Stewart, 7th of Ardshiel, who ascended as chief upon the death of Dugald Stewart, our 10th chief, who died without sons in 1769. Today Andrew Francis Stewart holds the title of both Appen and Ardshiel. Adherents and clansmen. The adherents or septs of Appen stem from families that lived in Lorne prior to the Stuarts gaining the lordship and the clan coalescing. These were other MacColls, who descended from Black Solomon, son of Coll, son of the Lord of the Isles, the MacLeish Livingstones, who were reported to be on Lismore in 1130, but whose heritage is so old that no one really knows the beginnings. The MacGillimichaels, or their anglicised form, Carmichael, are also so old that we can only guess. It is known that they were present in Appen prior to the 13th century. The Combicks descended from a family nickname from North Appen, and the Macrobs are actually Stuarts descending from Robert, son of Dougal, 1st of Appen. The McInnes, originally from the area of Morven, settled in the area in the early 15th century. Adherents include the McLaurens, Carmichaels, McCombicks, McColls, MacGillimichaels, MacIllimichaels, McInnes, MacLeish, McMichaels and Macrobs.